Hello, everyone. In this video, I'm feeling festive here. I'm sure you can see my Christmas tree is poking in. I cannot believe I'm fortunate enough to sit down. One of the greatest producers live. I cannot believe it. It's the amazing Christine Vachon. She's the co-founder of Killer Films and the producer behind films such as I don't even know where to begin. There's a list here, but I could go on all day. Films such as Carol, Poison, Happiness, Velvet Goldmine, Kids, First Reformed. More recently, stuff like May, December, and Past Lives. But like I said, I could go on all day. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on. How are you doing today?
Not bad. How are you?
I'm amazing. I mean, you're over in sunny New York, right?
I am in New York City right now in my apartment.
Yeah, what's that like? Are you feeling all festive? Have you been watching Christmas films or are you still busy? I imagine end of year kind of catching up on all the work. What's this period like for you?
Well, we have a movie that's going to be shooting right after the new year called Lone Wolf with Bryan Cranston and Lily Gladstone.
Oh
And
yeah.
then we have another movie that will be shooting a few weeks after that in the New York area um, with Willem Dafoe and Greta Lee called Late Fame. And that one's very exciting. They're both very exciting, but that one's exciting because it's Sammy Birch's next script, and she wrote May December.
Wow. And so you're kind of like in the midst of pre-production right now as we speak.
Yeah, yes, we are.
What's that process like for you? What's this like? Is this kind of the process that you prefer, or is it always difficult? Does it always change? How do you feel about kind of pre-production?
I mean, pre-production is arguably the most important piece in a low budget independent film. And I mean, I don't even know why I bothered to say low budget. The very nature of all
Yeah,
independent films is that they are, and that there isn't a real safety net. I mean, we did a movie called A Different Man, which was not a very high budget, but we did it with A24. So there was a safety net there.
yeah.
Um, but when you do a true indie, there isn't.
Wow.
So that's the that's where pre-production becomes really critical. Because that's really making sure where that all the T's are crossed and I's are dotted, etc. But that you really know what you're getting into.
Wow. And so do you have to be meticulous in this process, because obviously, you've kind of dealt with both spectrums. Sometimes you'll deal with a higher budget than you normally would, and sometimes you work with low budgets. How meticulous do you have to be as an indie producer in this kind of stage?
I would say whether it's a high budget or low budget movie, you have to make sure that you understand what every day looks like.
Yeah.
And once I mean, the thing is, like Todd Haynes, for example, he shot lists his films months in advance.
Really?
And
Wow.
um, and you might think that's rigid, but actually what it does is it allows him to not be rigid because he's already kind of set it all up, 3 months before we went to Savannah on May, December, he had all his shot lists done, which meant he knew what he needed out of
Yeah.
every single scene. But because of that, because he knew that, because it was already like planned out, that's when he could actually find a little serendipity. It kind of
Yeah.
frees him up a bit. Now, not every director is like that. And I've worked with plenty of directors who don't shot list at all, or only shot list on the day, or really need to like be in the actual location with the actors at that moment, half an hour before or an hour before they're going to roll in order to really figure out what the scene is. And that doesn't mean they're worse directors or better directors or what have you. It
Yeah.
just means different. But even those directors have had a pre-production process that has enabled them to lay the foundations of what they're going to shoot.
Wow. And so how early in the process, because it's funny, you talk about Todd, who's someone obviously you've developed a relationship with over the years. You've worked on a lot of films with him. You kind of have a better idea of how he works and what he's into, I suppose, as a director. When do you find that out? Because so much of producing is dealing with temperaments, whether it's egos, or I mean, everyone has an ego. I have an ego, you have an ego, every director has an ego. It's not necessarily a bad thing. But kind of how quickly will you find out how someone works, if they like the shot list, if they like the storyboard? Is it a kind of constant figuring out process, or now you're at the point where you can kind of figure it out early on?
Well, it's a good question. I would say, you know, the from the first conversation, like Celine's song is a good example because when we did Past Lives with her, she had no experience. She'd never been on a film set before.
Wow.
So what I was more interested in talking to her about wasn't shot lists or call sheets or what have you, but I wanted to talk to her about the story she wanted to tell. And she made it very, very clear very quickly that she really knew what that story was and she really knew how to tell it. So the fact that she wasn't familiar with a film set didn't matter to me because I can I can supplement that. I can tell her what a call sheet is. I can, help her figure out how to talk, how to articulate her vision to a DP or to a production designer or what have you. But she has to be able to know what that vision is.
Yeah.
And, I could tell you it's true. Like if you dropped me on a film set, you know, uh, in Mars or Ireland or wherever, within 2 minutes, I would be able to tell you exactly what kind of director that was.
Wow. And
Just
and
I've been
is
doing it for so long,
yeah, I was about to ask, is that from experience? But of
Just
course it would be.
everything is from experience. I mean, that's the thing, is it's like you do it for long enough and you just get a real sense of like, like the way when I speak to a director and they tell me about their story, sometimes I see they're not really sure.
Wow.
They're not really certain. And those aren't directors I like to work with. I really like to work with directors who are very clear about what they want to do. When you really think about it, directing is a series of decisions. That's all it is, all
Yeah.
day long. It's just, red or black, loud or soft, through the right or through the left, close
Yeah.
up or over the shoulder. It's just all day long. And if a director becomes paralyzed at that, then the crew feels it and is like, uh-oh, this is going to be a long day. Or we call it, my indecision is final.
Wow. And so do you find yourself when that does happen, which I'm sure is maybe it's common, maybe it's not, but do you find because you have that experience, you're able to kind of talk them down and talk them through? Because from the producers I've talked to, I found a lot of producing is problem solving, but it's also knowing how to talk to people. Like you said, knowing how to communicate with a DP or even with a gaffer or with some assistants or and so do you find that you kind of know how to talk to people? Is that something you've also gained with experience?
I mean, I would say now, if I feel a whiff of that around a director, I probably just say maybe we're not the best match.
Yeah.
Um, in the early days when I didn't always know, uh, I would find myself sometimes, on set in the middle of that first day going, uh-oh, we're gonna have to recalibrate everything because
Wow.
cannot work quickly. They get paralyzed about this, that, or the other thing. And sometimes a conversation helps, but honestly, you know, I feel like it's just one of those things. Somebody once said to me, producing can't be taught, but it can be learned. And sometimes I feel that way about directing too.
Yeah.
How do you really teach somebody how to direct? Like the great directors that I know, and I know a lot, they have almost an innate sense of how to tell a story visually, and their craft gets better as they get older. I don't mean that it doesn't. I
Yeah.
mean, and they learn a lot from every film that they do, but there's something about that ability to to tell a story that way that feels like you either have it or you don't.
Wow. I mean, you hit the nail on the head there. And it's funny talking about instincts because, I mean, you look at a filmmaker like Paul Thomas Anderson, he started out with Hard Eights and Boogie Nights. And what's really interesting is that I've heard him talk about in interviews how a lot of at the start was just trusting his instincts because he didn't know how a film was made. He didn't have that experience on set.
Right.
He didn't know what it was like. And he found as he kind of ended up making more films and he gained that experience, he was kind of trying to return to a point of instinct. And I thought that was really fascinating to start at a point.
Yeah.
And so, how much of kind of producing do you feel is instinctual? And I'm sure a lot of it is, but do you ever find yourself trying to go back to maybe how you acted 20 years ago, or is it kind of different for producing?
I mean, I understand. I feel like what Paul Thomas Anderson is referring to, and I don't know, but so I don't mean to put words in his mouth, but
Yeah.
there is something about not knowing how hard it is that
Wow.
gives you a sense of freedom. And I think when you start out in your career and you don't think to yourself, who the fuck do I think I am? Like that I could direct this movie or produce this movie.
Yeah.
If you feel that way, you probably won't do those things. Instead, what I felt, and perhaps what he felt, was like, fuck yeah, I can do this.
Yeah.
And once you've actually done it, you sort of look back, like looking back at like, you know, like those miles of road you just ran or what have you, and go like, how the hell did I do that?
Yeah.
Which is kind of what felt in the beginning. Now, I don't have that same. I mean, the other thing I would say maybe he's talking about is I am a big proponent of I don't like it when people say, well, this is just how it's done.
Yeah.
I mean, there are almost everything that happens on a film set has happened the same way for a gazillion years. And usually there is a good reason. It's usually
Yeah.
so that, no one gets hurt. That's usually the number one reason. And then it's like because the widget needs to go here instead of there because that's just how we do it. And and I work with a lot of directors who often question that and say, why do we have to do it that way? Why can't I try another way? And my response, honestly, is like, let's try it, you
Yeah.
know? And sometimes we try it and we're like, oh, that's why no one ever does it this way. Like, okay, got it, bingo. And sometimes we try it and we're like, you know what? This really worked.
But like that's amazing. I feel like that's the reason that I almost couldn't articulate why I love killer films because I feel like that shows in all of your work, in all of the films, is that they all feel singular but fresh and unique. Like A Different Man and Past Lives and May December, they're all three films I feel like are on totally opposite spectrums.
Yes.
But yet they're all so is that what interests you? Is it kind of finding that singularity and also being willing to kind of, I don't know, be like water in a way. Say nothing kind of has to be rigid, I suppose. Is that something that appeals to you as a producer?
I mean, I sort of know it when I see it.
Yeah,
Like when, each of those projects that came to us in different ways, I was like, oh, yeah, this is something. I mean, Past Lives is an interesting, it's interesting because when I really think about why that film was so successful, like if you pitched that movie, you'd be like, a little girl immigrates from South Korea to Canada and ends up living in New York and, studying playwriting, and at some point gets a desire to reconnect with her life in South Korea through, a kid that she was friends with,
yeah,
right? That doesn't sound so commercial. And then you add to it, oh, and by the way, like 75% of it is in Korean, right?
yeah.
But but the reason that movie works so well, in my mind, is because everybody thinks it's about them. And, like we even people come up to me and say, "Oh, I connected with it so much." And sometimes they'll say, simply because I'm an immigrant and I know what it's like to feel like you're part of this world, but you're not. But often they say, I also came to a point in my life where I chose a path and I never got to see what would have happened if I hadn't.
Wow.
And that movie, and some people will come up to us after the movie, like in tears over that. And Steven Spielberg, actually, I introduced
No way.
to him, when you are nominated for an Academy Award, you get to go to this lunch, and it's at the Beverly Hilton, and it's every nominee, and basically you eat lunch, but it is the best lunch in the world because then once you're done, all the nominees are brought up on stage for the class picture.
Wow.
and you get to be, you know, and they move you around and they're like, Coleman Domingo, move away, go to the third row, etc. And you get a picture of everybody, and
Wow.
those are all the Academy nominees of 2023. Anyway, at that lunch, I saw Steven Spielberg, who I vaguely knew. Like, I mean, I
Yeah.
think he was kind enough to pretend that he remembered meeting me. But I said, "Can I introduce you to Celine?" Which was really what I wanted to do. And I did, and he was like, "Oh my God, Past Lives. That's about me and my wife."
Wow.
So that's what I mean, is that movie just had that ability to be like, you know, you are just going to connect with it in a way that is personal to you. And that's, to me, not the only not the only harbinger of amazing cinema, but it's part of it. And A Different Man, in its own weird way, a lot of people also came up to me and said, I connected with this because I felt Edward's journey was so similar to mine, you know? And
Wow.
it's like, because the movie keeps turning upside down notions of genre and identity and disability and what makes somebody disabled, you know.
Yeah.
Uh, and it's just, again, I don't know if A Different Man had exactly the same resonance, but it had its own in
Like
such an extraordinary way.
it's so funny because I mean I saw a Different Man and it's one of my favorite films of the year, because both of my parents are deaf. But that wasn't something I think I kind of, funny hearing you talk about it now. I think I'm realizing things in a whole new way, which is amazing. And so I'd love to ask you this question, kind of carrying on from that, is that, obviously I'm, 17 and I haven't had the experience you have, but, when I watch films, to me, I think what I've kind of gathered, I guess, out of films that I love or the films that mean something to me is how sincere they are. And I know Tarkovsky obviously has that comment that, the key to making a good film is sincerity. And I think you can really feel that in Past Lives, how sincere it is. In A
Yes.
Different Man, how sincere it is. So, how important is sincerity to you at Killer
Well,
Films?
if I would call it sincerity. It's
Wow.
interesting to hear you talk about it. I guess I would use the word authenticity,
Yeah.
and it's kind of the same thing where it's like all movies use artifice. That's what they are.
Yeah.
But if you're using, it depends how and why you're using it. And if you're using it, I mean, the thing is, A Different Man it's very much, it is a story that Aaron Schimberg, the director, the writer director, was incredibly passionate about. And, for a lot of different reasons. But he was also having fun with the genre. The movie's funny. The movie
Yeah.
feels like it leans into this notion of like, am I a horror film? I don't know. I might be, you know. Am I like one of
Yeah.
like a body horror? I might be, you know. It kind of plays with that in a way that doesn't feel like it's at odds with the story he's trying to tell.
Wow. And so, is that kind of singularity something that really appeals to you straight away? And can you sense it? Is it something that you can see within the opening 10 pages of a script? Or how do you really know if something's singular? Like, how will you know if something's worth developing? Can you kind of tell straight away? Is it an instinctual feeling or what's that process?
It's instinctual. I mean,
Really?
it's definitely like this is a story. This is a story that I feel needs to be told for some reason. And sometimes it's also like this is a story that needs to be told and no one else is telling it.
Wow.
Sometimes it's like, oh, I think we've gotten in early on this. Sometimes it's that. Sometimes it's a there's also there's I mean there's layers. There's like, do I like the people involved? Do I feel like we could work together? Sometimes I sit down with a director, and even if I really like the script, I'm just like, we are not a good match. Like, I
Wow.
can just tell, like, we will not, there's a certain kind of director, and I don't know how to put it. Maybe a kind of, all directors, as you said, they all have big egos, as all of us do, but directors tend to need big egos to protect themselves which
Yeah.
I'm very pathetic to. So I don't mind that. I don't mind directors that are, pains in the ass about like this has to be perfect or that has to be perfect. I don't mind that. I'm sympathetic to that.
Yeah.
When a director maybe gets into that state over the size of their trailer, then maybe I start to mind. Then maybe I'm
Wow.
like, this isn't for me. And then sometimes I talk to a director about a project I might like, and I can just tell that like we will never be able to truly um problem solve together, you
Yeah.
know? And there are some directors who really believe that producers don't have much value and will be vocal about that. And that is their prerogative. But again, it's not, I don't want a director who compromises every single time I say, this is a really hard thing to do. I don't want to be working with a director who says, oh, well, then we won't do it.
Yeah.
I want to be working with a director who says, let me tell you why that thing is really critical to this story. But this other thing, maybe it isn't so much. So let's look at that, you
Yeah.
know? Um, and a director who, when I say, look, I just read the script like 5 times, and this is the thing I think we could lift out of it if we need to like, compress. I want a director who's thoughtful and thinks about it and takes ideas from wherever, takes a good idea from wherever it comes from. And I'll tell you, that is Todd Haynes, you know, I mean, it
Wow.
doesn't matter. If a great idea comes to him, whether it's from a PA or craft service or the camera assistant, he's like, great. You gave me a great idea. And
Wow.
oh, it's my idea.
And it's so funny because I remember I read an interview, you said Robert Altman was kind of the same, and he was someone who was coming from, obviously he had made film on film, like that he was coming from celluloid and
Yeah.
kind of towards the end, he was kind of going towards the end of his career, of course, he was going towards sort of digital. And that was
Well,
really interesting.
the first film he did on digital was the film we did with him,
Wow.
and it was called The Company. And I really remember, like, he was like, digital was just coming into play.
Yeah.
And he wanted to make more money on the movie than the budget could allow. And I was like, look, Bob, if you really want to make what you want to make, you should not shoot on film. And he was like, tell me more. And we did. We were like, this is what you would do, etc. And the great thing to me, the real learning experience for me with that was he was almost 80 years old. And his kind of joy and excitement in doing something new,
Yeah.
palpable and exciting. And he wasn't like, oh, I've never done this before. And I don't, he was like, I mean, if there was ever a medium created for Altman, it was digital,
Oh
right? I
man.
mean, being able to put cameras everywhere, letting it roll, forever. I mean, that he was like, I have found my
That's
medium.
so amazing.
Fortunately, he was 80 years old.
Like that's
So,
amazing to hear that about Altman. One of my last questions I'd love to ask you is Zemeckis has this funny story about working with Tom Hanks on Forrest Gump, where he was like he basically rang Tom and was like, if we're gonna do this, I need you to be my soulmate on this. Because that's the only way I can make this film is if you're in with me 100%. As a producer, does the director need to be your soulmate in a way? Do you need to be joined at the hip?
no,
Really?
no, I got plenty of friends. When, I mean, I think we have to have an understanding. The director has to feel that I am in their corner. And I guess what I would say really, what's really critical is we all have to be making the same film.
Yeah.
And you'd be surprised how often you're not.
Wow.
Know, where like the director is a little like, maybe, I sort of want it to be this kind of film, and I'm maybe not being totally honest with you about what it is, you know?
Yeah.
Um, but if we can all be making the same film, then I can protect that and I can try to make it better. I can do all those things. We don't have to be soulmates. I mean, there's some directors when we're on location. I go out to dinner with them every night, and there's some directors who, aren't really interested in anything once we're off set, you know, and that's fine. I mean, Todd is a special case because we have known each other for so long,
Yeah.
but it kind of depends. So I wouldn't say it's soulmates. It's more like, do we really understand each other? And do we really understand each other's goals?
Wow. Yeah. I think you're really that's it's really fascinating to hear you discuss that. I'd love to ask you my last and final question.
Okay, last and final.
Like this is the big one, and I have a Christmas tree, and I'm only a little boy, so you have to give me a great answer. No, I'm kidding.
You're not
What?
that little.
Well, I'm kind of trying to keep my little cute Irish innocence,
Okay.
before the mustache comes in and I start losing views. I'd love to ask you, what advice would you have for anyone looking to become a producer?
Um, I think for anyone looking to get into the film business at all,
Yeah,
or, as I sometimes call it now, the content creation business, because we don't just make films, we make television, we make miniseries, etc. Um, and I know that for some people, the actual distinction has started to wane. I would say what's really important is to understand that there's a lot of different ways to be creative in this business. And people think about directing and writing, and then maybe producing is like a, you know,
yeah,
way down the chute. And I think like it's really important to walk through the doors that open for you. You
yeah.
know, uh, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I certainly didn't know what I wanted to do when I was your age, but 10 years later, I didn't either. And
Wow.
I saw some opportunities and I took advantage of them and discovered like, oh, I like this, I don't like that. Like this is what I'm good at, this is what I'm less good at. But I feel like a lot of young people these days feel like there has to be a path.
Yeah,
Like I'm either on a path to doing this thing or I'm not. And if I'm not, then I'm screwing up. And that's the thing I feel like, in some ways getting experience in any way you can in
yeah.
content creation will serve you well.
Wow. I absolutely, I think you really hit the nail on the head there. I mean, can't argue with that. Thank you so much for taking the time.
My pleasure.
Before we finish up, are you on social media? Is there anything you can promote or anything people should go check out?
I mean, always a different man. I am on social media. I have a weird handle, which is KVPI, but I'm pretty easy to find. Mostly, I'm trying to go over to Blue Sky from Twitter now.
Yeah.
Um, and one of the things you'll find if you do start following me is what I'm almost more known for than my films is reviewing airport lounges.
That was really why I brought you on the channel. I wanted to get, but we
Oh,
ended
and
up
I'm
talking about
sorry we
films.
didn't get into like, the breakfast they serve at the Delta
I
Lounge,
had
but
so much I wanted to say about that. That's heartbreaking. Well, thank you so much for watching, everyone. I'll see you
my
all in the next
pleasure.
video. Goodbye.